precision psychiatry in some ways is a new term, from the last several years. But the concept behind precision psychiatry, I think, is one that in some ways is intuitive to anybody who thinks about the field. When we think about how medical treatments work of all kinds, we think our first job is to identify what is ailing the person. And we start, of course, by asking them about what's going on for them. But in most of medicine, we then use a whole set of tools. And over the years and the decades, we have evolved better and better tools at assessing what's going on with someone, not just what we see on the surface, but really what underlies it. So a doctor's office wouldn't be a doctor's office if we didn't have a blood pressure checked or an EKG, or in many cases, lab work done. If you injure yourself, you would assume that at least an X-ray, but maybe a CAT scan or even an MRI would be part of the assessment process. But for a variety of reasons, behavioral health, psychiatry, psychology has lagged behind. A lot of that's simply due to the level of complexity. The brain is by far the most complex organ in the body, and the tests that we can use to check your bones or your liver or your lungs, frankly, don't work for the brain. You can't just do an X-ray of a brain or a CAT scan, or to be honest, even an MRI, although maybe someday that'll change. But for now, none of those things will tell you. So we're really bound by what we've had so far, which is asking people to describe what's going on. What's exciting is that I believe, and I know Tetricus Labs believes, that that's starting to change. Because what we can do with a lot of the information that we gather, as well as some additional kinds of computer-based tasks, is analyze these from a new perspective. And to me, that's what precision psychiatry is about. It's really applying that to the patients who need it and at scale, meaning, applying it to enough people. And I think we've started to see the ideas behind that, but we have yet to see that get applied in hospitals like Silver Hill Hospital. So all this is to say, I think the future is bright as long as we really work together and collaborate on these tough problems. Human beings are really good at some things, and they're less good at other things. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about, in the model that you're describing, what is it that doctors and psychiatrists, psychologists are good at? And what are the things they need help with?
I saw many psychiatrists in my time, and there are sort of three core jobs that a psychiatrist does. The first thing is that they are capturing data about a patient. They're asking questions. And they're not just asking questions, they're also looking at, and you probably are better at understanding this than I am, but they're looking at sort of what you say and how you say it and how you're behaving in the room and how you're making them feel. The second piece is really an analysis piece. Based on the data I've collected about the patient, what does this predict based on my own experience about what treatment would work for the patient best? And then finally, the doctor has to actually treat the patient in practice and do that with care and compassion and flexibility. Doctors are great at the last part. They are amazing humans are great at delivering care with compassion and nuance, but computers tend to be better at capturing data, memorizing large data sets and analyzing large data sets. And so what our company's really doing is trying to support clinicians in giving the best care possible by building software to capture that data and then machine learning models to really do that analysis at scale. And empower doctors to have the information that they need to make the right decisions in care.
I mean, I think that makes so much sense, and I think it is so resonant with the experience of doctors. I think most, maybe all of us, love doing the third part. We like working with people. We like talking with them, connecting with them, and I do think that that's something human beings are very good at doing. I think data gathering, it's a little bit of a mixed story. I think there are aspects of it we may be good at. And to your earlier point, I think eliciting some things from a patient and then recording that in our notes, okay, we do that quite well. Being totally systematic and methodical, maybe not as much a thing that we're great at. Nor should we be, right? We're not robotic. We don't want to be robotic. We want to tailor things to patients. And that suddenly means that when you're now expanding what we do over lots of people, it's very hard to be consistent across everybody. And then the second piece, while I think we may be good at certain kinds of pattern recognition as human beings, we're also, we know this from decades of cognitive research, we're so biased by things. We're biased by what's going on for us that day. We're biased by the last patient we saw. We're biased by experiences we had. If that bias is used carefully, okay, there can be some advantages. But from the perspective of giving consistent diagnoses along the lines of what you're saying, that's not our strength. So this leads me into a question, actually. And I'm going to state it maybe a little bit provocatively, but do you think a tool like Tetricus is going to replace psychiatrists?
It's a great question, and one we've thought a lot about as a company and talked to a lot of our partners about. And the answer is a hard no. And I think looking at, for instance, radiology as an example, I think radiology is one of the places where AI has had the most advancement early. And studies have consistently showed that AI alone and doctors alone dramatically underperform AI plus doctors. And so one of the things we're really focused on at Tetricus is building what we call a human plus model. How can we use AI not to replace doctors, but to empower them to do more and more of the best work? And so, like you were saying earlier, I think it's right that there are certain signals that humans are much better at picking up on. We are, in our own way, large language models, right? We are processing signal, and we have had millions of years of evolution to refine our interpersonal signal interpretation, where large language models like OpenAI have only, a few years of experience. So there are things that human doctors will always pick up on better, and we need to make sure that we pair those important intuitions, which are really statistical analyses, just subconsciously or consciously, with AI that can de-bias some of that and help to sort of create more of those rigorous standards around the data that we're collecting. So our hope, and part of our hope for the partnership with Silver Hill, is really building a tool that works with clinicians in practice, in hospital settings, to support what you're doing so well here already. And certainly not to replace it in any way, shape, or form in my mind.
I mean, I just think that makes so much sense because we are better together. And the history of technology, I think, is not one of replacement of human beings, but of figuring out what humans are better at and what machines are better at, and then working collaboratively under some kind of human supervision. I think where we tend to get into more trouble is when these things get posed as opposites or somehow in conflict with one another. If we were to devise electronic tools or AI tools in the absence of human medical expertise, I think we would have a right to worry. But that's in a way the opposite of what you're proposing. And I really think from Silver Hill's perspective, it's such an opportunity for us to collaborate and work together, because we learn from what you're doing and ultimately get better at what we are doing.
And so getting the clinical collaboration with the machine learning and the neuroscience together is really the core of how we can make these breakthroughs. I'd also say that, as you were saying, mental health data, psychiatric data is complex, right? Patients often have multiple conditions when they're coming in with serious mental illness. They've often had a history of many different treatments or are receiving multiple treatments at a single time. Advances in machine learning have allowed us to gather data sets that are complex like that and make sense of them today in a way that we couldn't 10 years ago. And so we're really sitting at this cutting edge of AI that's enabling a lot of the breakthroughs that we can now do that we couldn't have done a decade ago.
Just to go back to that issue of complexity and multiple diagnoses, as many people may be aware, the average number of diagnoses that people get is many. At a hospital like Silver Hill, for example, it is not uncommon for our patients to have 5, 6, 7 different diagnoses. And what I often will say to patients or families is that doesn't mean they have 5, 6, or 7 different things wrong with them. It means that our terminology is inadequate to describe a single person in a way that is more comprehensive. Sometimes I think people get confused and they think, oh, having multiple diagnoses is like having both pneumonia and appendicitis at the same time. But it's not at all like that. It's that we just don't have an accurate way of describing it. So having a machine learning model or other more sophisticated models that understand these things together rather than try to dice them into these separate kind of arbitrary categories, really, to me, it brings a lot of hope for the future.
Could not agree more. And I guess that brings me to a question for you, which is, what do you see as the challenges for moving forward with precision psychiatry in a partnership like this?
No, it's a great question, and I think let me start with more of the system, in a way, societal challenges. We all know that mental health disorders are very, very common, and really, there is virtually no individual or no family that isn't affected in some way. But I think what we've struggled with as a society is A, how to understand the range of disorders, and B, how to apportion resources, whether they be financial or they be hospital or outpatient resources, to cover as many people in need as possible. But let me start with the first problem, because I think while mild disorders are extremely common, fortunately, as things become more severe, that's less common. Still important numbers, and they're more common than we wish they were. But we have to, I think, have appropriate treatments for mild disorders that are distinct from what we do with moderate to severe disorders. It turns out that we have a lot of good treatments for mild disorders. That's good news. It doesn't mean they're always adequately resourced and so on. But to me, some of the tools that we're talking about today, like at Tetricus, while helpful probably for everybody, are even more important in moderate to severe cases. The problem becomes that our resources get fewer and fewer. So the number of outpatient therapists or psychiatrists, particularly in an area like New York City or in Connecticut, not too bad, pretty good actually. The number who take insurance or who are willing to take government insurance, now not as many as we would like. The number who are willing to treat patients with complex disorders with multiple diagnoses, smaller. The number of intensive outpatients, residential programs, or inpatient, completely inadequate. So one of the big challenges from my perspective is how do we make sure that a tool like what you're developing in Tetricus Labs is not only available at the milder range, but is being trained and is being helpful at these more what we call higher levels of care. And that then leads to the second problem, which is how do we make sure that those systems, the intensive outpatients, the residential, or the inpatient, have the resources they need to collaborate with someone like Tetricus? Because there's this kind of paradox in our system that as you get to higher levels of care, the systems are less well-resourced, more stressed, and therefore less able to invest in the kinds of tools they need to move forward. Most inpatient facilities that I know of, if we approach them with an offer like this, would say, sounds great, but there's no way we have the money or the time or the resources even to do it, even with a company coming in with their own sets of resources. They're just too stressed. And it's one of the ways in which Silver Hill offers, to me, a pretty unique opportunity. We're fortunate, we're incredibly fortunate to have been here for 90 plus years, to have built a system where we're able to use insurance and offer free services to some individuals, but also, frankly, to be able to work with people who are able to pay privately so that we have enough resources to offer the very best levels of care, even at higher levels of complexity for people with severe disorders. So the way I see it is we have the opportunity that many, for example, academic medical centers or city hospitals simply don't have. And by developing a tool here, we can then help disseminate it. We can work with you, we can work with others to make sure that the tool, once developed, then becomes widely accessible to everybody.
100%. And I think that gets to sort of my vision for what Tetricus can enable in the future, which is, I was really excited to partner with a hospital like Silver Hill that's delivering the absolute best care available so that our machine learning systems can learn from the absolute best care available and then disseminate it, as you said, to the 40% of people that are getting mental health treatment from their primary care physicians, where there are not psychiatrists in the area across the country. I think the second piece, you mentioned reimbursement, and one of the things I'm hopeful about is that by creating standardized ways of looking at patient recovery and outcome measurements within a hospital like Silver Hill, we can demonstrate just how effective the care is and just how important reimbursement for this care is, and hopefully help garner more resources and more insurance reimbursement for the types of services that are delivered here so that they are more available across the country.
I think we all know that calling up an insurance company and saying, hey, we've got a great new idea, will you pay for it? And them saying, sure, happens never, right? But if we can demonstrate that these tools are effective, and ultimately, I believe, will save money because diagnoses will happen sooner, more efficiently, treatment will happen sooner, more efficiently, and people will get better. And that is good for everyone, including the insurance companies. So I'm really looking forward to us being able to do that kind of work, show that together, and ultimately have this be a reimbursable service for as many people as possible.